So at this point, we have resolved to become anglers. We've embraced the identity of what it means that Christ has called us as his followers to be fishers of people. We've talked about and learned what it means to read the water, to kind of know where the fish are in the streams where God has placed us, the streams that we occupy as we go through our days. Here's an often a scenario that happens often. A fisherman comes up and starts talking or showing pictures on their cell phone about what an amazing day of fishing they had. And it's terrific. And you see this wonderful catch of fish, and every fisherman is going to ask two questions to the person showing them those pictures without fail. Where were you? What were you using? In fly fishing, flies are simply hooks. They're plain hooks that have been adorned with various feathers or furs or synthetic materials tied together in a way that makes them look like the food source of a particular species of fish, the kind of food that a fish likes to eat. Here, what was frustrating for me when I was learning to fly fish was that depending on the day, I could be fishing the same stretch of water I'd fished 2 or 3 days before, using the same exact fly pattern that I'd had success with 2 or 3 days before. But in this particular day, nothing. In truth, the ecosystems of rivers and streams and estuaries are always in flux. Rainfall, water flow, temperature, sunlight, cloud cover, moon phases all impact what's happening in the world and in the world beneath the water. So if you want to catch fish, you need to be aware of what's happening in the world around you. That's why at a certain stretch of river at a certain time, you could catch things with a certain kind of fly, and 2 days later, it all seems the same, but it's not. Everything has changed, and that fly no longer works. To be a successful angler, you need to learn to speak in the native tongue of fish. You need to learn to speak in the language of the things that the fish are attracted to, because fish are not indiscriminate. I mean, depending on what's happening around them, a fish brain essentially begins to play and live their life. They live their life playing the matching game. They will only see what they want to see. And so if you introduce a fly pattern that they are not looking for, or a movement in a fly that is inconsistent with the pattern that they're programmed to pick up on, and if you can't match that, then it's going to be a long day. Which brings us back to the two answers every angler wants to know. Where were you? And what fly were you using? That is to say, what was happening in the world, and how did you introduce yourself into that environment in a way that was successful? Some anglers spend their lives understanding entomology, which is the study of bugs, and they will really geek out about it. Or ichthyology, the study of fish. Through observation of the natural world, anglers become kind of experts in bug life and aquatic life, and they would rather go deaf or mute than tell you where they were and what they were using, because they spent their whole life honing in on this particular skill of learning how to not just read a river and read the water, but to understand that the ecosystem and the life system that goes into it. The phrase used for the application of picking the right fly at the right time is called matching the hatch.
You want to match the hatch. So the type of bugs that are coming off the water, you want to choose a bug that looks as natural as what's coming off the water.
Yeah.
You have to match the hatch. If you don't, it's not, wasting your time.
Yeah.
Good anglers are keen observers before they busy themselves about trying to catch fish. They watch and they listen with intention so that when they do start fishing, it's not guesswork. They're not wondering about what's going to happen. When I first started fishing on my own, I would go to a fly shop early in the morning. And every fly shop generally has an area mostly central to the fly shop. And it literally has hundreds of bins with thousands of flies in them of all different patterns and sizes. And it's pretty overwhelming. So I'd go into a fly shop and I would say, I'm interested in fishing this part of this river today. what should I use? And they were generally happy to spend my money on all manner of flies. And usually one or two of the patterns that they would sell me would actually work. On one occasion, though, I had hiked a long way down a decent tributary off the Gallatin River. As I fished this really great stretch of water, knowing that there were fish there, I tried every single pattern I'd tried in Montana up to that point, and not a single thing worked. But the whole time I was fishing, I was swatting carpenter bees. Now, a week before, I had gone to a fly shop, and I didn't buy it to fish it, but there was a bee pattern made with black and yellow deer hair that was just a beautiful fly. And I thought, I want that just because it's a beautiful fly. And after 30 minutes of not catching any fish in this perfect stretch of water, swatting and carpenter bees, I thought, I'm going to go ahead and throw that on there. I'm not kidding you. As soon as that fly hit the water, the biggest brown trout I caught in Montana literally leapt out of the water. Its full body was out of the water and ate that fly, which taught me you got to match the hatch. Here, the world was telling me through these buzzing bees of what these fish might be looking for. I just wasn't paying attention. This concept of matching the hatch is vital for us as we think about what it means to fish for people too. Knowing what's going on in the world, what's happening in people's lives. The truth is, evangelism, sharing the good news, being a presence of gospel hope to people is about observation before it's about speaking. It's about how I'm listening more than what I'm saying. It's about awareness of what's happening under the surface in a person's heart. And you don't get that by talking. You do get that by observing and listening. Obviously, the clearest example of matching the hatch that we find in the scriptures is in the incarnation of Jesus. That God became human in order to redeem humanity is matching the hatch at its finest. God became us to save us. In the prologue of John's gospel, we read this, and the word became flesh. The living and eternal God became flesh, sarx, flesh and blood, like you and me, and dwelt among us. It pitched a tent here with us. And thus we have seen his glory, the glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. It matters that in Jesus we can behold and see the glory of God. That we know what God looks like, that we know what God's love sounds like in Jesus, that we know what God's grace feels like in Jesus, that we know what the truth of God's gospel sounds like in Jesus. And it matters, too, that Jesus spoke in a Galilean accent, that he came to that part of the world and he had to learn to speak, and he spoke with an accent in a way that made sense to the people that he was ministering to. It matters that in Jesus, God became fully human and thus entered into this broken ecosystem of our humanity in a way that we could encounter and experience the God who redeems. But he entered into this on our terms as one of us. The idea of incarnation, of entering into by becoming one with, is how we begin to understand what we are called to do as we fish for people. We are called to be an incarnational presence. There's a reason why it mentions that the church, God's people, is the body of Christ, that we are Christ's presence incarnate in the world for them to see him in us. The Pharisees asked Jesus' disciples a question one day. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Y'all remember how Jesus responded? He said, I eat with them because sick people need a doctor. And I haven't come to save the righteous, but sinners. I'm here to be with people like this, on their level, in their part of the river, because this is how I catch them. I sit with them, I break bread with them, I talk with them in their world, on their turf, speaking in an accent that they're familiar with. Jesus says, that's why I'm here. Being incarnational is essential. Paul, the greatest fisher of people in the history of the church, talks about being incarnational in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. In one sense, this is Paul just talking about how he matches the hatch. Listen, he says, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all that I might win more of them. I've made myself a servant to everybody so that I can catch them. To the Jews, I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. What was he saying? Wherever I am, I match the hatch. I read the world around me. I'm exactly who I need to be to best interact and engage with these people in a way that they can understand why I'm here. He became exactly what he needed to be, so as not to be a hindrance to anyone hearing the gospel in a way that they could understand. I learned to speak in their accent. I learned to be exactly who it is I need to be so that they can hear this good news that Christ has entrusted me to share to them. Everything that Paul was in service to the gospel. Paul became all things to all people for the sake of the gospel. For us, that means that we observe what is going on in people's lives. And we enter into that. A mentor of mine served as a missionary in Brazil for 25 years. He and a team they were kind of just going down the Amazon River, seeing the village and hopping out and doing just gospel work with indigenous people. And at this one particular village, they couldn't make any inroads with the men in the village because they would be ministering during the day and men slept all day. Turns out that the men in the village were crocodile hunters. They would eat the meat as a village and they would sell the pelts, and that's how they survived. And so this mentor of mine told me that, part of becoming all things to all people meant that he began to go out crocodile hunting with these people at night. Now, these crocodile hunters would go out in dugout canoes that rode about 6 inches above the water, and they were getting out crocodiles that were 10 to 15 feet long. And I said, man, well, how does that work? He said, well, there's two men. There's a harpoon man and a gun man. The harpoon man stabs the crocodile in the head, lifts it up. The gun man sticks the shotgun in his throat. And I was like, and you did this? Because I just knew him as a professor. And I'm like, man, you are hardcore. And what he said to me, I've become all things to all people, that I might save some. As Paul was saying, and I do it for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. For this guy to connect with these crocodile hunters on the Amazon River, he needed to be with them. He needed to do as they do. And so he did for the sake of the greater call. The question for us, I think, as we think about what it means that Christ has commissioned us to be his incarnate presence in the world is what lengths might we be willing to go to be with those, to be an incarnate presence with those that God has sent us to. There's a story from Acts chapter 16. Paul, this great apostle, came also to Derbe and to Lystra, and a disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. He was well spoken of by the brothers at Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Timothy was to accompany Paul on this missionary journey. And at this point in Paul's missionary career, he always went to the Jews in each city before going to the Gentiles because he was Jewish. Those were his people. But if Timothy was going to have efficacy in ministry amongst the Jews, he would need to be circumcised or they wouldn't listen to him. And I don't know what that conversation sounded like between Paul and Timothy. Hey, God, this is what it's going to look like to do ministry where we are. But we know that Timothy subjected himself to that. Why? So that he could become all things to all people in order that he might save some. Timothy was willing to match the hatch in an extreme way. I went fly fishing in Iceland last summer, and my guide there, he was just a really terrific guy. He didn't talk a lot. His name was Marosh. And I loved the way he approached the water. He would just stand there like perfectly still, just taking it all in, kind of aware of the cloud cover, the temperature, the wind, the water life, just silent, observant. And as he was watching the water, I would always just I'm waiting to go fishing, and he's just sitting there, just like a statue, just taking it all in. And after what sometimes felt like forever, because I'm excited to go fishing, he would tie a fly on the line and tell me kind of exactly where to stand, exactly where to cast it. And more often than not, I would find a fish looking for exactly what I had offered. For us, I think as we consider what it means to kind of observe the world around us, matching the hatch means asking questions. It really does mean being sensitive to what's going on in someone's life. I mean, better than many words are right words spoken in right moments. I had a waitress one time who had a sleeve tattoo, and I recognized on her arm spruce trees that I had seen in the Pacific Northwest. And I commented on the tattoos and the trees, and I said, where are you from? And she says, well, I'm from Washington State. And I was like, well, what brings you down here? And she said, well, my boyfriend got stationed down here, but we broke up, so I don't know what I'm doing here. Lonely, homesick. Well, the gospel can speak to that. Seeing a tattoo and asking a question gives the chance to be an incarnate presence to a waitress who I just discovered by asking about a tattoo, who was lonely, who was homesick. You may have a coworker or a friend or a family member that's struggling with a medical diagnosis or a relationship struggle or some kind of acute or unique grief. And the truth is, where people are experiencing brokenness in the world, where they're experiencing pain, difficulty, hardship, separation, grief, that's precisely the place where Jesus fits. That's precisely where his incarnate presence becomes light and hope to people who are desperate. People's brokenness is exactly where the gospel of redemption becomes something that they're looking for. Our calling as fishers of people is to discern that, to seek to understand what is happening beneath the surface in people's lives, and to offer them Jesus there in an accent that they can understand. Because the beauty of the incarnation is this: Jesus fits. He just fits. There's never a situation or a circumstance where he doesn't. That's the glory of incarnation, that there's not a wound in the world that Jesus is not physician enough to heal. Are we willing to listen, to match the hatch, to become all things to all people, that we might enter into that place that they occupy in this world with him, and speak the gracious word of Jesus in a way that they can understand it? I got one more fishing story for you. I was with a good friend of mine. We were in Montana, and one of the times that I'd gone up there, and I was excited because we were fishing. We were going to go on a float trip down the Madison River. This is kind of where fly fishing, where you'd be in what's called a drift boat, and you'd actually fish boat. And you have kind of your guide and the boat pilot in the middle, and you're fishing from the front and the back. And the Madison River just happens to be one of the best trout rivers in the United States. And this was a perfect day for fishing. And by that, I mean, it was kind of cloudy. It was a little bit overcast. The wind was blowing a little bit. It was a little bit drizzly. I mean, it wasn't like it was chilly. But the truth is, in conditions like that, fish tend to be a little bit more active. And when we met our guide at the fly shop where we hooked up with him, I was happy to see that he was a grizzled Montana man. And no doubt he was hungover, which is also a good sign when a guy's taking you fishing, because I don't know, it just comforted me that this guy knows how to fish. He's the kind of guy that you want. And the way this works is he would drive us in the truck and you drop it off, and then they would have what's called a trailer service. And so after we left, there was a company that would come and drive his truck 9 miles down the Madison River where we were going to be getting out. And then when we got out of the boat, his truck would be waiting there for him. So we get in the drift boat. We are about 45 minutes into this 9 mile float, and the guy gets a phone call. And it is an expletive laden tirade. And I'm thinking like something's not going on. And so he gets off the phone and, me and my buddy are kind of like, and I said, what's up, man? And he says, they repoed my truck. So the company had showed up to do what they were supposed to do to take the truck down the river. But they get there and they're like, hey man, your truck's not here. He says to us, it's been a tough year, man. I missed a couple payments. I didn't think they'd come get it already. I don't know what I'm going to do. He gets on the phone, starts calling people to see if it picked up. And meanwhile, he's rowing way too fast past some of the best trout water in the whole country. And my buddy and I didn't know what we were doing. So he's not helping us fish, but he's on the phone trying to figure this thing out, trying to end this trip as quick as he can because his life is falling apart. And I'm thinking, I spent a lot of money for you to help me catch fish in this particular stretch of river. Eventually, he gets off the phone. He's a bit in a daze, and we stop for lunch on the bank there of the Madison River. Half of our trip is over, and we haven't caught a single fish. On the perfect river, on the perfect day, our guide was worried about many things, and us catching fish was not high on his priority list. I began to ask him questions. Where are you from? How long he's been guiding? Married? Divorced? Divorce came after he got back from one of his deployments because he got pretty messed up in the war. Misses his daughter, who's 11, loves to take her hunting and fishing. She's real fishy, he says. Eventually, he asked me what me and my buddy did. And it's kind of like, well, we're pastors. And he's like, oh, you got to be kidding me. He says, if there's a God, he's laughing at me right now. Eventually, we get back in the boat, and he asks us a question. How can you believe in a God that would allow this much bad stuff to happen in the world? And he shared a little bit about his time in the military. He'd experienced the ravages of war. He'd been abused by a Catholic Church. He'd gone through the hardship of divorce, suffering the present pain of estrangement from his daughter, the reality of the economic hardship that led to his truck being repossessed. And he's asking how, if there is a God, can a God let all that stuff happen in this world? What a great question. And I got to share with him the story of a God who doesn't sit outside this brokenness, watching it happen, but who entered into it, who endured the ravages of human depravity, the pain of estrangement, and who knows unbearable suffering like no other, and comes alongside of us in that suffering, and who is willing to endure that for us, for our wholeness, for our healing, as a mechanism in the way that God would redeem us in the midst of this mess. The truth is, I didn't catch a fish all day, not a one. But at some point on that river, I realized trout were not the target species that day. And I couldn't tell you what the fish were hungry for that day. Best stretch of water I've ever fished in the United States of America, and didn't catch a fish on the perfect day. And my job in that moment was to do my part to match the hatch, to speak the beauty of the gospel into that broken moment. The glory of the incarnation is that Jesus fits what the world is hungry for every single time. And as fishers of people, it is our joy and our privilege to help meet people with Jesus in that place where they're experiencing the brokenness.